welcome again to the UX Research Rundown podcast. My name is Henrik Mattsson. I am the CEO of Lookback and your host for this show. In this podcast series, we are talking about what I think is one of the most important and interesting challenges that we're facing in our industry and community, and that is how do we get the people who are building the experiences that we are researching to engage and participate in our research work and leverage all of the wonderful insights that we surface to actually build better experiences. And we have been talking, and we will be talking with a lot of interesting researchers from different parts of the industry. And today we have with us Vanessa Wiegel. I'm German, I'm Swedish German. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You can correct me if you want, but thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. That is the correct German pronunciation. I also go by Vanessa Wiegel, the more Americanized version of saying that. Yeah, thrilled to be here on the podcast.
Awesome. What I think is super cool is that you have an interesting, a little bit different background from some of the other leaders we're talking with on this podcast. You're working in hardware. You're currently the senior director of UX and human factors research at Motional, doing self-driving taxis. And before that, you were at iRobot, building or researching vacuum cleaner robots and things like that, right? Yes. And before that, you have a super interesting kind of step before that, where you were in at PBS educational programming and things like that. So super interesting mix. Would love to hear more about that. So I'd love to start, as I always do, with getting your origin story, because I think it's super important first as a background to understanding where all of these interesting things that I'm sure you're going to share with us came from. It can be hard for people when they, the point of this is a podcast like this is to spread knowledge that is there in the industry, but perhaps not accessible to everyone. And we're like a young field and a lot of people. And I think it's so important to put that into the context of where those insights kind of came from, because it's rarely kind of a straight path. So could you start a little bit by sharing kind of how did you get into UX research? When did you realize, oh, I'm a UX researcher? And things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely was a circuitous route. And I think like formative years, I think some helpful context is like my grandfather was a toy inventor in his free time, and he worked full time working on the space shuttle and working for GE on like Gemini and such. So it was, I think he had a big influence on me on in terms of working on technology and then like invention and like creating new tools that don't exist and toys. And then when I was a kid, I would also see problems that would exist and try and iterate and brainstorm solutions to that. So kind of leading up, and this, I didn't realize this until I took this job recently at Motional, but for instance, I grew up in New England. There's a lot of snow, and I had experience as a child riding in the car with my mom, and we fishtailed off the road in the snow. And so I set about prototyping a device for dispensing sand over tires to try and get traction, because it was kind of like a scary experience. I was like, how can I help? And then also, I don't know what this says about my mom's driving. She backed into another car. And so this was before backup cameras existed. So I went about trying to figure out how to hook up a VHS camera to reflect what was behind her. And so I think that those were all kind of early experiences that I had. But I actually, kind of moved away from that in school and thought I was going to be a doctor. And I started as pre-med in my undergrad program. And I was pursuing that. And midway through undergrad, I took what I thought was going to be a blow-off video production course. And I fell in love with storytelling and documentary film, and actually ended up getting my degree in communications out of undergrad. And from there, I went to work on a documentary series for the History Channel, and very shortly thereafter moved to PBS, which you had mentioned, working on educational television and websites and later mobile apps. And I was working on one of the PBS shows, Arthur, and we were working on an educational website to help parents and children with a variety of health issues, asthma, peanut allergies, etc. And I was talking to a designer, a graphic designer at the company, and she was like, we should really, and she introduced me to the concept of thinking about user needs and like,
Mm.
how should we be thinking about the needs of like a parent coming to this website? And I started doing some research on what sounded like a really interesting field. I discovered Bentley University's Human Factors program, sat in on the foundational Human Factors course, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. It's leveraging an understanding of the brain and human behavior to design better products and services. Like this feels like the perfect fit. And so I started getting my degree while I was still working at PBS and introducing user research and UX design to the organization. And then from there, I joined iRobot to found and then build up their design research practice, and then moved most recently to Motional, where I am now.
Wow, that's quite a story. I love that. So do you identify a bit as almost like an inventor, or is it more? There's I hear two things here. One is like you fall in love with problems. You see the problem, you're like, how can we solve this? And then, but you also have this kind of how can we like actually building the solution, like hacking together different cameras and stuff like that for the backup. But is it still a mix in you, or have you really landed in this kind of understanding the problem and helping others solve it, if I put it like that?
Yeah, I think what I most enjoy and what my skill set is most linked to right now is really understanding problems, understanding the needs, and helping working with designers to brainstorm and develop
Mm.
concepts. The terms, the actual execution of that, I haven't leaned into that for a while, and I think there are more skilled designers and prototypers out there than what I can offer. But I love that process of like finding those design opportunities and exploring different ways to address those needs.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I was talking to Matt Gallivan from Slack yesterday. I don't know if you know him, but he said this interesting thing, that because I was fishing for like what are some of the characteristics and skills that we need as research leaders, and he mentioned that, well, you need to know what you're good at, but you also need to know what you should leave kind of to others. So there seems to be like this increased specialization. So
Yes.
super interesting. Okay, cool. So uh, I'm gonna shift over to kind of the main theme of the podcast, which is how do we get people involved? And there was something in what you said. I don't know if the audience also kind of got that feeling, but I really got this feeling that you're you go straight for you have a fascination with problems. Like I don't know if you recognize yourself in this, but very like and almost like a not pre-professional kind of it wasn't your job to put sand in front of the wheels. It's just like you're interested in the problem, and it made me think about how often what we're doing when we're getting engagement is to help other people fall in love with the problems that we have fallen in love with, kind of
Mm.
a little bit. Like would you agree with that? And what have been some of your experiences in kind of trying to the storytelling also that you have in all of this, in your experience, like telling great stories and everything? Like what has been your journey as a storyteller, like trying to lift problems and help other people get involved in it?
Yeah, I think I've had the good luck and fortune that I've just naturally with the companies I've worked for, I've found a lot of people who love the problem,
Mm.
but who need help in figuring out how to solve it. And
Mhm.
so I don't always have to develop passion for solving the problem, but develop passion for why user research is the avenue or the platform through which to answer that and solve that problem.
Hmm.
Um, the storytelling component and kind of leveraging that background in film and documentary has been very helpful in terms of um, evangelizing research, bringing kind of case studies to life to show like this is the impact we can have, but also really just making the data come alive, and adjusting that, because I think as we know, like you don't just do one readout and expect that that's going to get acted on, or that's the best way to socialize insights with an organization. And so we think about not only what happens in that readout in a long form format, but then how we disseminate insights in shorter form content. And I think a lot of what we did to get our stakeholders engaged at iRobot kind of was connected to that. But where I always start with engagement of stakeholders is when I get to a new org, or when I have a researcher joining the company, is really to encourage them to apply their start by applying your research practices to your stakeholders. Understand, like, what are their driving motivations, what are the problems keeping them up at night, and really seek to understand their anxieties and their level of understanding of our processes and what sort of biases or assumptions they might have around that. Really thoughtfully choose that first project that you are going to tackle with them, and it might actually be more tactical than strategic at first, because you want to kind of show some immediate value. Get them engaged in doing a brainstorm of research questions. We have a process of doing this at a quarterly basis where we come together, and it's the researcher, the product manager, the engineers, the designers, and if relevant, we try and pull in maybe like the data scientist, if that's applicable. And then in my case at iRobot, where it was interdisciplinary, the market researcher, and we're jointly all together brainstorming what are the questions we need to answer, what are the challenges we have with the product right now. We're mapping that out by the type of research that it merits. Is it more discovery, exploratory, definition research, or validation research? And then we're choosing that first study, and the researcher is bringing them aboard from like, this is my proposal, getting feedback. Here's the people I'm thinking about recruiting, and here's why, and talking through that. Depending upon the method, if it's interviews, engaging them, we do a lot of ethnographic work. We do a lot of contextual inquiry, diary studies. So finding ways to engage them in the process of the data analysis and collection, sometimes doing joint analysis sessions with them when we've had a little time to initially process it. And then after that, of course, there's the readout. But after that readout, thinking about other ways to, go beyond that, workshops that we plan around the implementation of the recommendations, and making sure that we're drumming home, what is the insight, what is the recommendation. I think sometimes these get misinterpreted, or you can't rely on one readout for people to fully understand that. Of course, it helps when they've been there the whole journey and they more deeply understand it. And then figuring out kind of fun ways to not only engage that group, but the broader organization in the research process. So we've tried a variety of different paths for that, from the typical lunch and learns to AMAs, Ask Me Anythings on Slack, to we had a Family Feud game show with like facts about user research. And we had like interdisciplinary teams, and everyone competed against their knowledge of our users. So I think it's just finding, I think that's maybe where the storytelling and kind of the film has kind of helped and played out in my own strategy for being effective as a researcher.
Wow. So it sounds like transparency is really key. Am I getting that right? And kind of just like involving everyone from the get-go, basically, like even before you're starting. Because it sounded to me, if I understood you correctly, that what you're doing is you're doing like an internal discovery first. It's not like your team goes out in the world and tries to find what's wrong with the product. You start internally in the team.
Yeah, so we start by like, what is our existing knowledge? What is actually separating knowledge from assumptions, and then figuring out what we need to learn. I always like to begin with, any sort of secondary research that we might be able to leverage, and then that's the foundation for going out and conducting primary research. We don't want to duplicate efforts that have already happened. We want to leverage the knowledge of our stakeholders, and at minimum, we want to understand, what are their hypotheses and assumptions, and then how do we leverage that knowledge, in any research that we undertake.
Oh, I love this. So I have so many questions. So what? Because here's what I hear. I hear an approach that I think, based on everything else that I've been hearing from other people who have like really had success with getting engagement. I think what you're doing is you're attacking directly, or attacking is the wrong word, but you're really approaching this from kind of a building trust, building engagement, building relationships from day one. And that's what I hear from, that's a common thread from like other research leaders too, that like this is a big part of the job. But it's so interesting that you start right away into that, rather than kind of doing research and then trying to like do this as a parallel process. It's like your research process starts with this, almost, it sounds like to me. So that's super interesting. What's the um, how does that look like in the kind of in the first, I don't know what the timeline is here, week or two? Like, what are some of the kind of the challenges that you may meet? How do people react to this? Are they, oh, I've never been treated like this by a research team before? Or is it like, oh, this is great? Or like, oh, I don't understand why I have to be in these meetings? Or like, what's the reaction in the team? How is this received?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it depends on the team. It depends on the organization. I think, I think to be clear, we don't like day one, like get on the calendar and like, here, here's what
Sure.
UX research is, and like, let me understand your needs. But, my approach when I enter a new organization is to kind of leverage my key partners, whether it's, UX design or product management or what have you, to just kind of understand like the relative maturity of the organization for research. Who are the key people that I need to understand and influence? Where can we add the most value in your position? Kind of like get a sense of the lay of the land, and then utilize that knowledge in whatever strategy or approach I take with those individual stakeholders. But it is jumping into that and beginning the trust building pretty early. I find that when we've tried the opposite route of like, let's do some research and then try and build credibility that way and then build a relationship, it's not as effective as like understanding like what are their needs, anxieties from the get-go, and taking that into account in that first project. I find that's more effective. And then they see that value versus like, maybe I would have executed that first study differently had I had a deeper understanding of those needs and hypotheses and assumptions. So I found that to work better. But it is kind of getting the lay of the land and then kind of engaging with those stakeholders and like, and really trying to understand them and then undertaking that first project.
Interesting. So I can to me this makes perfect sense given what I've seen in my life, and I could guess a little bit about why this is more why this works better. But I'd love for you, and you already mentioned the quality of your first study is improved by like actually having done this work first, right? But could you deep dive into some of the other for people that are just trying out, like why do you think that this is a kind of better approach? Like, why do you think it works? What are some of the drivers behind that?
Yeah, so I think the alternate approach is for you to go out and based on your knowledge, without working closely with stakeholders, say like, this is a need, let me go about executing this study, and then you're bringing that data back to them. And I think the challenge is like, maybe that would work in an organization where actually your stakeholders are have worked with researchers in the past, have a certain level of familiarity with process. But I've found that there are oftentimes more questions about like, why was this your choice of methodology? How do we know these are the right people? And because they weren't part of the process, like it's kind of like this black box of how you got to these insights at the end versus, and even if they are a little, have worked with researchers, every researcher is a little bit different. Your approach is a little bit different. So I feel like when you start with that relationship building and you start with that transparency into the process, it builds more trust, because otherwise people make assumptions about maybe how you came to your conclusions or what that looks like, or like, how much confidence can I have in the data? But when you're engaging them, not only are they seeing that and they have that transparency, but you're eliciting feedback so you can be responsive to any concerns along the way and be addressing those. And it really starts to feel like a partnership versus like, let me, toss a bunch of data over the fence to you and like hope that you receive it with open arms.
Very wise, I think. Okay. So when I've talked to other people about the trust building exercise, there are two challenges that kind of people talk about, right? So one is the one that you're solving by this approach, which is the almost personal trust. Like, this team member works with this team member, and trust, and this trust is built, and a good working relationship for future work is established, right? That's one part. The
Yeah.
other part is like, yes, everyone loves this, that happens, but then kind of the incentive structure of the whole organization and the way that work is organized kind of gets in the way of that really kind of blooming out into what it could be. And then have you experienced those kind of obstacles? And if so, like, what have you done to overcome them?
Can you say a little bit more about kind of like what some of the, when you say like work getting into the in the way of those relationships, is there an example that you're thinking of?
Right. Yeah. So let's say that because you have this approach that is, it starts very early with the, let's say you're working with developers, or this, it depends on how the thing is
Yeah.
organized, obviously, but let's say developers, right? And they sit in their processes that is kind of managed by perhaps a product manager or engineering manager or something like that, and they have their sprints or whatever, and then your process comes in and it's appreciated actually by the developers on the
Mhm.
team, but it doesn't fit with, they don't have time to go to those meetings, or they're busy doing something else, or they need to kind of ship, or they need to do something else. So sometimes, like, the way that work is organized can get in the way of things that everyone agrees is a better way to to
Yeah.
work, but it's just not the way it works. So I was just
Yeah.
curious if you've seen that, and what you've done about it.
I've definitely seen and experienced that, and I think there have certainly been times where you have whether it's developers or engineers, and the way that the engineering organization is structured, you don't actually have embedded resources working on product teams. And so there can be that tension of like they're being pulled in a number of different directions priority wise, and they're interested in the work, but they just have limited bandwidth. Um, One of the approaches that has worked there is trying to you kind of take a little bit of a bespoke approach to that first opportunity or that first study you try and undertake with that partner, and get them bought into the process, and then they're the ones who end up advocating to their manager or whoever, like, we should be working more closely. Is there a way for us to, and I've had this happen, like, how can I carve out more of my time to be focused on this problem, versus supporting generalized needs? I mean, the ultimate solution, and this has again happened, is when we show how effective we can be when we work in on product teams and have embedded resources from design and engineering. We're working together and we are all familiar with the problem, and we just move so much faster. Then that oftentimes motivates structural changes within the organization that then pay off.
Mm.
Um, it also kind of depends how your organization, like the origin story of your organization. And like when I was at iRobot, like my group actually started in the engineering org, so we naturally had a lot of strong
Mm.
connections there, and understanding. And product management was a separate organization, and then were pulled out into a separate product org. But because we had those relationships with engineering, it made it actually quite easy to kind of continue that goodwill and that level of partnership, versus when you're in an organization where you've always been separate, products has always been separate from engineering. It requires a bit more kind of legwork to understand, like, what are our R&Rs, how do we, what is the value, what value can product bring, how do we understand the challenges that our engineering counterparts are facing, and how do we be attentive to that in the way we approach research.
Mm. So, I have so many questions. I need to prioritize. This is so interesting. So uh, you recently moved from iRobot to Motional, and to the extent that you're, like, free to share, and comfortable sharing, like, it seems like you had a lot of good experiences at iRobot, and I'm assuming that you're trying to implement them and, like, bring this method of working, like, into your new workplace, and kind of how is that going? And, like, what are some, is it the same challenge, or you're facing the same challenges, or it's something else, or uh yeah, please, if you can share some of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think there are a lot of similarities between the organizations in terms of, we're working robotics, strong R&D capabilities, and like getting it's nascent technology. We're trying to like get it to work technically, but also factor in like the human computer interaction, human machine interaction components. So I think iRobot went on a journey, and it started before I got there, and I was there for part of that as well, of kind of shifting into being more consumer user focused. And I think Motional is very much on that journey right now, and it's exciting to be a part of that and to be able to kind of leverage some prior experiences, how to work most effectively with our partners in engineering, for instance, to our current work here at Motional, and not every strategy that worked at iRobot will work at Motional, and there's a uniqueness to the work and a higher level of complexity in the fact that we're working on robo taxis. And the nature of our product development process is even more complex when we factor in that we work with partners like Lyft and Uber, who control, say, like the ride hailing app component of that. We're designing all of the HMI and technology within the vehicle itself. And then we're a joint venture with Hyundai. So Hyundai is working to develop the actual vehicle itself and the hardware there. And so we have multiple partners that we need to work through. So the complexity of our product development process and the level of collaboration is definitely different. And so it merits there are its own challenges and strategies that we're kind of figuring out how to best work together, how to communicate, how to align on our roadmap together most effectively. But a lot of the core strategies and things that have worked in the past certainly apply in this context as well.
Yeah, well, as you're saying that, it seems pretty clear to me that because every place is different, this approach of starting with kind of like an internal discovery is just the right starting step, because places are different, so you can't just start with like the research and then do interesting.
It takes a little while to kind of assess where you can add the most value, and there's so much opportunity, and we see so much opportunity to conduct research and inform our processes and kind of pull in different types of data, behavioral, attitudinal, etc. So it just you need to give yourself a little bit of leg room or time to kind of establish that foundation to then actually make smart strategic decisions about where you invest your energy. What are the projects you go after? I mean, some problems, are like pretty consistently articulated by stakeholders when you join an organization, but sometimes you just have to experience them for yourself, and you might see different things than they do coming in with an outsider's perspective.
Right. So unfortunately, we have to start rounding this discussion off, but one last question I have. Could you say something for the people who are, they haven't experienced this journey yet, but they think that this sounds lovely and they want to achieve this as research leaders in their places? Can you say something about like the time perspectives and like some of how do you manage your almost said your sanity, but like how do you manage your focus in all of this work that needs to be done? Because this sounds like a journey that's like it's going to take some time. It's going to be some up and downs. You're going to have to do a lot of you have to do the work, but you also have to do the relationship building. Like any advice to people who are kind of just starting this journey, things to look out for? What would it look like from the inside, and like different management strategies there?
Yeah, I think as researchers, like we are so eager to show demonstrate value, that we just want to jump right in. And depending upon the organization, there's a lot of complexity to kind of like to data points to gather and to process. So it definitely is a journey. And like I'm 6 months into my new role at Motional, and there's still things that I'm learning every day about whether it's the product or the organization. So I think, the most important thing is to establish kind of a realistic kind of, whether it's your first 90 days or your first 6 months kind of learning plan, and just be kind to yourself about, what it is you have accomplished. I think it's good to hold yourself accountable to say like one or two, these are my one or two priorities, like high level strategic priorities this month that I'm going to focus on. And I've struggled through this myself. There's so much you want to do. And when you're just trying to kick the can down the road a little bit on too many things, nothing comes to fruition. And so I think it's been a lot of like both discipline and like, empathy for myself and like, what I can accomplish, and just trying to focus efforts and know that it's a continuing journey. But the good news is, and what I've seen is it's a flywheel. So there's a lot of work to start, and then you get a bunch of, irons in the fire, and then it gets easier and easier, and you build up more and more momentum. And so, and you're building up that trust and the credibility all the way. So like the amount of time you need to spend kind of evangelizing or influencing or like trying to articulate like why this is the right approach, like that kind of diminishes over time, which is good.
Awesome. Oh, what a perfect place to end. Like realistic hope. You will get the flywheel going. It's worth it. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, you will get there, and it's just like celebrate the small wins you have along the way and along that journey. And I think few people would claim like I've perfected this. Like there are no issues. It's perfectly seamless. Everything's working flawlessly. And if you get to that point, then like go on to the next opportunity.
Yeah.
Solve it again.
If it were easy, everyone would do it. So very good, very good. Thank you so much for sharing all of these incredible insights. I'm sure the audience had a lot of value from this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. And yes, for everyone who's listening and like this kind of stuff, this is just one of many episodes with interesting research leaders in our industry. There's also a newsletter, the UX Research Rundown newsletter, that you can subscribe to for more content like this. So until next time, happy researching, and be kind to yourself, as we heard in this podcast. It's very important. You'll get there. Take care. Bye-bye.